In a small town surrounded by green fields and quiet streets, life moved at its own gentle pace. People knew each other's faces, shared smiles in the local market, and greeted one another warmly on their way to work or school. It was the kind of place where nothing much seemed to happen, until it did. On an ordinary afternoon, a woman and her young daughter were walking home after running errands. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays over the pavement. The little girl skipped ahead, her laughter ringing out like music as she clutched her favorite toy, a soft bunny with floppy ears. Her mother watched her fondly, feeling grateful for these simple moments together. They had just finished picking up groceries and were taking a shortcut through a quieter part of the neighborhood. As they turned onto a side street, the peacefulness of the evening was suddenly interrupted. Two police officers stood near a parked car speaking loudly to a man who appeared upset. Their voices carried across the empty road, sharp and tense. The woman instinctively slowed down, unsure of what was happening but wanting to avoid any trouble. She held her daughter's hand tightly, pulling her closer as they tried to pass unnoticed. But fate had other plans. One of the officers spotted them and immediately raised his voice. "Stop right there," he commanded, his tone firm and unwelcoming. Startled, the woman froze, unsure why she was being addressed so harshly. Before she could say anything, the second officer stepped forward, his movements quick and aggressive. He grabbed her arm, yanking her toward him. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his face inches from hers. The woman stammered, trying to explain that she was simply passing by with her child. But the more she spoke, the angrier the situation became. Her daughter, frightened by the sudden commotion, began to cry, clinging to her leg. The sound of the little girl's sobs only added to the tension brewing between the adults. The crowd that had gathered nearby grew larger as curious neighbors stepped outside to see what all the shouting was about. Some whispered among themselves, while others looked on in disbelief. Things escalated quickly when one of the officers shoved the woman backward without warning. She stumbled, losing her balance, and landed hard on the ground. Her daughter fell with her, letting out a piercing scream as her head struck the edge of the curb. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The woman scrambled to pull her child into her arms, panic rising in her chest as she saw blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. Neighbors rushed forward, some calling for an ambulance while others tried to comfort the distraught mother. The little girl lay limp in her arms, her eyes fluttering shut despite her mother's pleas to stay awake. When the ambulance finally arrived, paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize the child. The woman followed closely behind, tears streaming down her face as she begged them not to give up. At the hospital, doctors fought to save the little girl's life, but hours later, the unthinkable happened. A doctor emerged from the operating room, his expression heavy with sorrow. He delivered the news no parent should ever have to hear. Her daughter had passed away. The shockwaves of this tragedy rippled through the community almost instantly. By morning, everyone in town was talking about what had happened. Social media posts spread the story far beyond the town's borders, drawing attention from people miles away. Anger and grief mingled in equal measure as residents demanded answers. How could something like this happen? Why had the officers reacted so violently? And most importantly, who would be held accountable? Protests erupted outside the local police station within days. Hundreds of people gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans calling for justice. Among them was the grieving mother, her heart shattered, but her resolve unshaken. Friends, family, and even strangers rallied around her, offering support and vowing to fight alongside her. Together, they formed a coalition determined to uncover the truth and push for meaningful change. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey toward healing and accountability. The days that followed felt like a blur for the grieving mother. Every morning she woke up expecting to hear her daughter's laughter filling the house, only to be met with an unbearable silence. The weight of loss pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, let alone think clearly. Yet even in her darkest moments, one thought kept her going. She couldn't let this happen to anyone else. Her child's life had been taken too soon. and if there was any way to prevent another family from enduring the same pain, she owed it to her little girl to try. With the help of a lawyer who believed deeply in justice, the mother decided to take legal action against the police department. Filing a lawsuit wasn't something she had ever imagined herself doing. It felt foreign, intimidating, and overwhelming. But as they sat together in a small, dimly lit office, going over the details of what had happened that night, she realized this was more than just about her. It was about holding people accountable when they abused their power. It was about shining a light on the cracks in the system so others wouldn't fall through them. News of the case spread quickly, drawing attention not just locally but across the country. Journalists wrote articles, TV anchors discussed it during evening broadcasts, and social media buzzed with outrage. People shared pictures of the little girl, her bright smile, her love for stuffed animals, the innocence in her eyes. Strangers sent messages of support, some recounting similar stories of injustice involving law enforcement. For the first time, the mother didn't feel completely alone. She was surrounded by voices echoing hers, demanding change. As preparations for the trial began, evidence started piling up. Surveillance footage from nearby homes captured parts of the incident, showing how aggressively the officers had acted. Witnesses came forward, describing how the situation escalated unnecessarily. Experts were brought in to analyze police procedures, pointing out glaring flaws in training and protocol. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture. This tragedy hadn't been an accident or a rare mistake. It was the result of systemic issues that needed urgent fixing. But preparing for court wasn't easy. Reliving that night over and over again reopened wounds that hadn't yet begun to heal. The mother spent countless hours meeting with her lawyer, poring over documents and practicing her testimony. Sometimes she'd break down in tears, unable to continue. Other times, anger fueled her determination, pushing her to keep fighting. Through it all, her lawyer reminded her why this mattered, not just for her own closure, but for the greater good. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed, with reporters, activists, and community members filling every seat. Cameras clicked outside as people waited anxiously for updates. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The two officers involved sat stoically at the defense table, their expressions unreadable. The mother, dressed simply but with quiet dignity, took her place beside her lawyer. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she stood to give her testimony. She spoke directly to the jury, her words raw and heartfelt. That night, she began, pausing to steady herself. I was just trying to get my daughter home safely. We weren't doing anything wrong. We were walking back from the store, holding hands, laughing. And then, everything changed. Her voice cracked as she described the fear in her daughter's eyes, the sound of her screams, and the moment she realized something was terribly wrong. I begged them to help her, she continued, tears streaming down her face. I begged them not to hurt us. But no one listened. My baby died because of their actions, because they didn't care enough to stop and think before they acted. The room fell silent as she finished speaking. Even the judge seemed moved, nodding solemnly as he thanked her for her courage. Expert witnesses followed, testifying about the lack of proper training and oversight within the police force. They explained how situations like this could have been avoided if officers were taught better ways to handle conflict. One witness, a former police officer turned advocate, described how excessive force often stemmed from a culture of impunity. When you know you won't face consequences, he said, it becomes easier to make reckless decisions. The prosecution presented its case meticulously, leaving no stone unturned. Meanwhile, the defense argued that the officers had acted under pressure, claiming they were following protocol. But their arguments rang hollow compared to the mountain of evidence stacked against them. By the end of the trial, it was clear which side carried the truth. After weeks of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. The courtroom held its breath as the foreman stood to announce the decision. Guilty, he declared, his voice firm. Both officers were convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to prison terms. A wave of relief washed over the mother, though it was bittersweet. No verdict could bring her daughter back, but at least there was accountability. A small step toward justice. Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted from the crowd gathered to hear the outcome. Supporters embraced the mother, congratulating her for her bravery and resilience. Reporters thrust microphones toward her, asking how she felt now that the trial was over. She hesitated for a moment, then looked directly into the cameras. "This isn't about revenge," she said softly but firmly. "It's about making sure this never happens again. To anyone." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations nationwide. Lawmakers began discussing reforms to improve police training and accountability. Activists organized marches and campaigns, using the case as a rallying cry for change. Slowly but surely, progress started to take shape. Policies were rewritten, oversight committees were formed, and communities demanded transparency from those sworn to protect them. For the mother, the fight didn't end with the trial. Inspired by her daughter's memory, she founded an organization dedicated to preventing similar tragedies. Through workshops, educational programs, and advocacy efforts, she worked tirelessly to create a safer world, one where no parent would lose a child due to senseless violence. Though the pain of losing her daughter never fully faded, she found purpose in honoring her legacy. Every year on the anniversary of her daughter's passing, she visited the spot where it had happened. A small memorial now stood there, adorned with flowers, candles, and notes from people who cared. As she knelt beside it, tracing her fingers over the engraved name, she whispered, "You made a difference, sweetheart. Because of you, things are changing." In that quiet moment, surrounded by love and hope, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her little girl was smiling down on her. The months that followed the trial were a mix of emotions for the grieving mother. On one hand, there was a sense of relief. Finally, someone had been held accountable for what happened that night. The guilty verdict wasn't just a win for her. It was a victory for everyone who had stood by her side, demanding justice. But on the other hand, the emptiness in her heart remained. No amount of legal action or public outcry could fill the void left by her daughter's absence. Every morning she woke up to the same crushing reality. Her little girl was gone. Still, life had to go on. The mother knew her child would want her to keep moving forward, to find strength even in the darkest moments. So with trembling hands and a heavy heart, she began taking steps toward rebuilding her life, not for herself, but for the promise she had made to honor her daughter's memory. She poured all her energy into the organization she had founded, determined to turn tragedy into something meaningful. It became her mission, her purpose, and eventually her healing. The organization started small, operating out of a tiny office donated by a local business owner who supported the cause. At first, it was just her and a few volunteers working late nights to plan workshops and create materials aimed at educating people about police accountability and conflict resolution. They reached out to schools, community centers, and churches, offering free sessions where they discussed the importance of de-escalation techniques and respectful communication between law enforcement and civilians. These early efforts weren't glamorous, but they planted seeds of change that would grow over time. Word of the organization spread quickly, thanks in part to media coverage of the trial and its aftermath. People from neighboring towns and cities began reaching out, asking how they could help or get involved. Donations trickled in, some large, some small, but each contribution felt like a vote of confidence, a sign that others believed in the work she was doing. Local artists painted murals dedicated to her daughter, turning blank walls into vibrant tributes filled with messages of hope and resilience. One mural featured a young girl holding a stuffed bunny, surrounded by colorful flowers and the words, "Her light will guide us." As the organization gained momentum, so did the push for broader reforms. Lawmakers, inspired by the mother's courage and persistence, introduced new bills aimed at improving police training programs. Some focused on teaching officers how to handle high-stress situations without resorting to violence, while others emphasized transparency and accountability within departments. Activists joined forces with lawmakers, organizing rallies and petitions to ensure these measures didn't stall in legislative limbo. For the first time in years, real progress seemed possible, and it all traced back to one woman's unwavering determination. But the journey wasn't without challenges. There were days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. Critics accused her of being too emotional, too radical, or even seeking revenge. Online trolls posted cruel comments, questioning her motives and attacking her character. Some even tried to discredit the organization, spreading false rumors to undermine its credibility. Yet through it all, she refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned on the support of her growing network. Friends, family, volunteers, and strangers who believed in the cause as much as she did. One particularly difficult moment came when she received a letter from one of the convicted officers. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions, claiming he hadn't intended for things to go so far that night. Reading those words stirred conflicting emotions within her. Part of her wanted to dismiss it outright. He had already caused enough damage after all. But another part wondered if his apology might signal a step toward redemption. After consulting with trusted advisors, she decided not to respond directly, but instead used the incident as an opportunity to highlight the importance of accountability. During a televised interview, she said, "Apologies are meaningless unless they're backed by real change. Words alone won't bring my daughter back, but actions might prevent another parent from losing theirs." Over time, the organization expanded beyond education and advocacy. It launched initiatives aimed at supporting families affected by similar tragedies, providing counseling services, legal assistance, and financial aid to those in need. Survivors of police violence found solace in connecting with others who understood their pain, forming bonds that helped them navigate the long road to healing. One mother, whose teenage son had been killed during a routine traffic stop, described the group as a lifeline. Another father, whose wife died in custody, said simply, "For the first time, I don't feel invisible." The impact of the organization extended far beyond the town where it all began. National news outlets picked up stories about its success, shining a spotlight on the grassroots movement sparked by one woman's loss. Celebrities and influencers lent their voices to the cause, amplifying its message to millions. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and conflict resolution into their curriculums, inspired by the workshops the organization had created. Even police departments in other states reached out, asking for guidance on implementing better training protocols. Slowly but surely, the ripple effects of her work touched lives across the country. Despite the growing recognition, the mother remained humble. She never sought fame or fortune. Her only goal was to make the world safer for future generations. Whenever reporters asked her how she managed to stay strong, she always gave the same answer: "I do it for her. Everything I've done, every tear I've cried, every battle I've fought, it's all for her." Or, her love for her daughter was the driving force behind everything, a beacon of light guiding her through the darkest times. On the 3rd anniversary of her daughter's passing, the town held a special ceremony to unveil a permanent memorial in the park. Hundreds of people attended, including activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens moved by the story. The memorial featured a bronze statue of a little girl sitting cross-legged, cradling a stuffed bunny in her lap. Engraved around the base were the words, "In loving memory of innocence lost and the hope of a brighter tomorrow." As the crowd gathered around, the mother stepped forward to speak. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "When I lost my baby, I thought my world had ended. But then I realized I couldn't give up, not when there was still so much work to be done." This memorial isn't just for her, it's for every family who has suffered because of injustice. It's a reminder that we can't let fear or anger divide us. We have to come together, listen to each other, and fight for what's right. Her speech ended with applause, but more importantly with a renewed sense of unity among those present. Strangers hugged, sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Children played near the statue, laughing and running freely, a stark contrast to the somber reason they had all gathered. For the mother, it was a bittersweet moment. While the pain of losing her daughter would always linger, She took comfort in knowing her legacy lived on, not just in the memorial, but in the hearts of everyone touched by her story. That night, as she walked home under a sky dotted with stars, she whispered a quiet thank you to her daughter. "You started something amazing, sweetheart," she said, clutching a photo of the two of them tightly in her hand. "And I promise, I'll never stop fighting for you." With each step, she carried not just her grief, but also the hope that someday no parent would have to endure the kind of loss she had. And maybe, just maybe, that hope would be enough to carry her through. The years rolled on, and the mother's efforts continued to grow in scope and influence. What had started as a small grassroots movement rooted in personal tragedy blossomed into a nationwide force for change. Her organization became synonymous with hope and resilience, drawing supporters from all walks of life. People who had never met her or her daughter felt connected to their story, a testament to how deeply it resonated with the human spirit. One of the most significant milestones came when the organization partnered with a major university to conduct research on police-community relations. Together, they developed training modules designed to teach officers how to approach tense situations with calmness and respect. The program emphasized active listening, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution, skills that many departments sorely lacked. Initially met with skepticism by some within law enforcement, the initiative gradually gained traction after pilot programs showed promising results. Officers reported feeling more confident handling difficult scenarios without resorting to force, while community members expressed increased trust in local police. For the mother, seeing this progress was both gratifying and heartbreaking. While she celebrated every step forward, she couldn't help but think about how different things might have been if such reforms had existed earlier. If only those two officers had known better, her daughter might still be alive. The thought haunted her, but it also fueled her determination to keep pushing for systemic change. "I don't want anyone else to feel the way I do," she often said during interviews. "No parent should have to bury their child because someone didn't know how to handle a situation properly." As the organization expanded, so did its reach into underserved communities. Many neighborhoods, particularly those populated by marginalized groups, had long suffered from strained relationships with law enforcement. Residents there were hesitant to call the police even in emergencies, fearing retaliation or mistreatment. To bridge this gap, the organization launched outreach programs specifically targeting these areas. Volunteers went door to door, hosting town halls and workshops where residents could voice their concerns directly to officers in a safe environment. Slowly but surely, walls began to come down. Conversations replaced confrontations, and mutual understanding replaced mistrust. One such event took place in a low-income neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The turnout was larger than expected, filling the community center to capacity. For hours, people shared their stories, some heartbreaking, others infuriating, but all united by a common thread of frustration and fear. One elderly woman recounted being handcuffed during a routine welfare check simply because she couldn't hear the officer knocking at her door. A young man spoke about being pulled over multiple times for no apparent reason other than the color of his skin. Each story added another layer to the complex web of issues plaguing the system. Listening intently, the officers present nodded along, visibly moved by what they heard. At the end of the session, one of them stood up and addressed the crowd. "We're sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for what happened here tonight, but for everything you've endured. We're committed to doing better." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to those in attendance. That night, something shifted. Not overnight, not completely, but enough to spark a new chapter in the relationship between the community and its protectors. Back at the organization's headquarters, the team worked tirelessly to sustain the momentum. Fundraisers, awareness campaigns, and educational seminars became part of their regular rhythm. They collaborated with artists, musicians, and filmmakers to create content that highlighted the importance of empathy and accountability. One short film, based loosely on the mother's story, went viral online, racking up millions of views and sparking conversations across social media platforms. Viewers flooded comment sections with messages of support, sharing their own experiences and pledging to stand against injustice wherever they saw it. Despite the successes, challenges persisted. Resistance from entrenched power structures within law enforcement remained a constant obstacle. Some departments refused to adopt the new training protocols, citing budget constraints or logistical hurdles. Others paid lip service to reform, without implementing any real changes. Frustrated but undeterred, the mother doubled down on her advocacy work, calling out hypocrisy whenever she encountered it. During a heated panel discussion aired live on national television, she confronted a high-ranking official who claimed his department was already doing enough. Enough? She shot back, her tone sharp yet controlled. Tell that to the families who are still waiting for answers. Tell that to the children growing up afraid of the very people sworn to protect them. Real change takes effort. It takes sacrifice. And until you're willing to put in the work, your words mean nothing. The audience erupted in applause, and the official sat silently, unable to respond. Through it all, the mother found solace in the connections she forged along the way. Survivors of similar tragedies reached out regularly, seeking advice, comfort, or simply a listening ear. She made it a point to reply to every message personally, knowing firsthand how isolating grief could feel. Over time, these interactions grew into a tight-knit network of individuals bound together by shared pain and purpose. They called themselves the Light Keepers, a nod to the idea that even in the darkest moments, there was always a flicker of hope worth protecting. On the 5th anniversary of her daughter's passing, the mother organized a national day of remembrance. Cities across the country lit candles in solidarity, holding vigils to honor victims of police violence and celebrate the progress made toward reform. In the town where it all began, thousands gathered in the park around the memorial statue. Children released balloons into the sky, each carrying a handwritten note expressing gratitude, love, or dreams for the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of orange and pink, the mother stepped up to speak. I used to think justice meant punishment, she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. But now I know, it's so much more than that. Justice is about creating a world where everyone feels safe, where no one has to live in fear, where we treat each other with kindness and respect, no matter who we are or where we come from. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. Some were smiling through tears, others held hands, finding strength in unity. My baby, girl taught me that, she continued. She may not be here physically, but her spirit lives on in every act of courage, every moment of compassion, every step we take toward a better tomorrow. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and chanting her daughter's name. It was a powerful reminder that while the road ahead was still long, they were walking it together. For the mother, standing there surrounded by so much love and determination, it felt like a victory. Not the final one, perhaps, but a meaningful one nonetheless. And as she walked home under a starlit sky, clutching a single white rose, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her little girl was proud of her too. As the years passed, the mother's journey became less about personal healing and more about leaving a lasting legacy. Her daughter's memory wasn't just a wound anymore. It had transformed into a beacon of hope for countless others. The organization she founded had grown beyond anything she could have imagined in those early days of grief. What started as a small group of volunteers working out of a cramped office was now a nationwide movement with chapters in cities across the country. Yet, despite its size, the heart of the mission remained unchanged, to ensure no family would ever endure the same loss she had. One of the most remarkable shifts came when the organization began collaborating with schools. Recognizing that change needed to start young, they developed programs aimed at teaching children about empathy, conflict resolution, and civic responsibility. These weren't dry lectures or boring textbooks. Instead, they used storytelling, role-playing, and interactive activities to engage students. For instance, one popular exercise involved simulating real-life scenarios where kids had to resolve disagreements without resorting to anger or violence. Teachers reported seeing immediate results, Classrooms became calmer, friendships stronger, and bullying incidents fewer. The impact extended beyond the students themselves. Parents noticed changes at home too. One father shared how his son, who used to lash out during arguments, had started using phrases like, "Let's talk this through," instead of shouting. Another mother recounted how her daughter organized a fundraiser for a classmate whose family was struggling financially, inspired by what she'd learned in the program. These stories reinforced the belief that fostering kindness and understanding in the next generation could ripple outward, creating a kinder, more compassionate society. But the work didn't stop there. The organization also focused on empowering communities to hold their leaders accountable. They created toolkits filled with resources: how to file complaints against misconduct, how to document interactions with law enforcement, and how to advocate for policy changes at local government meetings. Workshops were held regularly, teaching people practical skills to make their voices heard. In one town, residents successfully lobbied for body cameras to be mandatory for all officers after attending one of these sessions. In another, a group of teenagers campaigned to establish a civilian oversight board, ensuring transparency within the police department. Each victory, no matter how small, added up to something bigger: a culture of accountability slowly taking root. Of course, not every battle was won easily. There were setbacks along the way, moments when progress felt painfully slow or outright impossible. Some politicians dismissed the organization's proposals as unrealistic or unnecessary. Others accused them of being anti-police, twisting their message to suit their own agendas. Trolls continued to attack online, spreading misinformation and hate. But the mother refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she turned criticism into fuel, using it to sharpen her focus and strengthen her resolve. During a particularly heated debate, she addressed her detractors directly. "If you think we're doing too much, then ask yourself why we have to do anything at all. Why is our system failing so many people? That's the question we should all be asking." Despite the challenges, moments of triumph kept her going. One such moment came when a major city announced sweeping reforms to its police department, inspired by the organization's model. Officers were required to undergo extensive training in de-escalation techniques, cultural competency, and mental health awareness. Independent monitors were appointed to review cases of alleged misconduct, and community members were invited to participate in shaping new policies. The announcement made national headlines, with the mayor crediting the mother and her team for paving the way. "They showed us what's possible," he said during a press conference. "We owe them a debt of gratitude." For the mother, hearing those words brought tears to her eyes, not because she sought recognition, but because it validated everything she had fought for. Change was happening, bit by bit, and her daughter's name was attached to it. People often asked her how she managed to stay hopeful in the face of so much adversity. Her answer was always the same: hope isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. Every action we take, no matter how small, moves us closer to the world we want to see. That sense of hope radiated through the annual memorial events, which had grown exponentially over the years. What once was a quiet gathering in a park had evolved into a nationwide celebration of resilience and unity. Cities lit landmarks in honor of victims of police violence, while musicians performed benefit concerts to raise funds for advocacy efforts. Artists painted murals, poets wrote verses, and activists marched, all united by a shared vision of justice and peace. At the flagship event in the town where it all began, thousands gathered around the statue of the little girl with the stuffed bunny. Children played nearby, laughter filling the air, while adults hugged and cried and promised to keep fighting. During one of these memorials, a teenage boy approached the mother with tears streaming down his face. He told her about his older brother who had been killed in a similar incident years ago. "Your story saved me," he said, his voice trembling. "After he died, I wanted to give up. But then I heard what you did, and it gave me strength. Now I'm volunteering with your organization, trying to help other families like mine." She pulled him into a tight embrace, whispering, "You're not alone. None of us are." These encounters reminded her why she kept going, even on days when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. It wasn't just about her daughter anymore. It was about everyone who had lost someone, everyone who deserved justice, everyone who dreamed of a better future. And though the pain of losing her child never fully faded, it became intertwined with purpose. Every step forward, every life touched, every policy changed, it was all part of her daughter's legacy. On the 7th anniversary of her passing, the mother stood before a crowd larger than ever before. Holding back tears, she looked out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. "7 years ago, my world shattered," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion choking her throat. "But tonight, I see proof that love is stronger than loss, that hope can conquer despair, that together we can build a world where tragedies like this don't happen anymore." As applause broke out, she closed her eyes, imagining her daughter watching from somewhere far away. "I miss you every day," she whispered silently. "But I promise, I'll never stop making you proud." The 8th year since the tragedy marked a turning point, not just for the grieving mother, but for the entire movement she had sparked. By now, her organization had become a household name, synonymous with resilience and reform. Its influence stretched far beyond local communities, reaching international audiences and inspiring similar efforts worldwide. Yet despite the global recognition, the heart of the mission remained deeply personal. For the mother, every speech, every workshop, every candlelit vigil was still about one thing: honoring her daughter's memory. One of the most significant developments came when a major streaming platform released a documentary series based on her story. Filmmakers spent months interviewing her, capturing raw and unfiltered moments of both pain and hope. They followed her as she traveled to different cities, meeting families affected by police violence, speaking at conferences, and leading workshops. The series didn't shy away from the harsh realities of her journey: the sleepless nights, the tears shed in private, the moments when she questioned whether she could keep going. But it also highlighted her unwavering determination to create change. When the first episode aired, millions tuned in, moved by the honesty and vulnerability of her narrative. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from viewers around the world, sharing how the series had touched them. Some wrote about their own losses, thanking her for giving voice to their silent struggles. Others expressed gratitude for opening their eyes to issues they hadn't fully understood before. One woman, a single mother from another country, sent a letter saying, "Your strength gives me courage. I lost my son to injustice, and I thought I'd never find a way to move forward. But watching you fight for what's right makes me believe I can too." These words reminded the grieving mother that her work wasn't just about policy changes or systemic reforms. It was about connection, about letting people know they weren't alone. But the documentary did more than raise awareness. It reignited conversations about accountability within law enforcement. Lawmakers cited specific episodes during debates, using real-life examples to push for new legislation. Activists referenced the series in protests, holding up signs with quotes from the mother's interviews. Even some police departments began showing clips during training sessions, encouraging officers to reflect on their roles in building trust with the communities they served. It was proof that storytelling had power, a power to educate, inspire, and drive action. Amidst all the attention, the mother stayed grounded. She continued to focus on grassroots efforts, knowing that true change happened community by community, person by person. One initiative she launched during this time focused specifically on mental health support for survivors of police violence. Many families struggled not only with grief, but also with trauma, anxiety, and depression. Recognizing this gap, the organization partnered with therapists and counselors to provide free services to those in need. Support groups were formed, offering safe spaces for people to share their experiences without fear of judgment. For many, these sessions became lifelines, places where they could heal, connect, and find strength in shared pain. Another groundbreaking project involved creating a digital archive documenting cases of police misconduct. The goal was to ensure that no story went untold, no victim forgotten. Families submitted photos, videos, and testimonies, each entry adding to a growing database accessible to researchers, journalists, and advocates. The archive served as both a memorial and a tool for accountability, shining a light on patterns of abuse that might otherwise remain hidden. When it officially launched, thousands visited the site, leaving comments of solidarity and vowing to use the information to demand justice. Despite these successes, challenges persisted. Not everyone welcomed the changes brought about by the movement. Some critics accused the organization of exaggerating problems or undermining law enforcement entirely. A few even tried to discredit the mother personally, dredging up old rumors, or twisting her words to paint her as divisive. Social media became a battleground, with trolls attacking supporters and spreading misinformation. Yet, instead of retreating, the mother leaned into the controversy. During a live Q&A session hosted by a popular news outlet, she addressed her critics head-on. "I understand fear," she said calmly, her gaze steady. "Change is scary, especially when it challenges systems we've relied on for so long. But refusing to adapt doesn't make us safer. It perpetuates harm. If we truly care about protecting lives, then we must be willing to confront uncomfortable truths and do the hard work of fixing what's broken." Her response earned widespread praise, with many praising her poise and clarity. Even some skeptics admitted her arguments gave them pause, forcing them to reconsider their stance. Through it all, the mother found comfort in the relationships she built along the way. Survivors of similar tragedies became her closest allies, forming bonds that transcended geography and circumstance. Together they celebrated victories, mourned setbacks, and supported one another through the toughest days. They called themselves the Lightkeepers, a reminder that even in darkness there was always a flicker of hope worth protecting. Their motto, "We carry the light so others may see," became a rallying cry at events, printed on banners and t-shirts, chanted during marches. On the 9th anniversary of her daughter's passing, the mother organized what would become the largest gathering yet. Cities across the globe participated, lighting candles, hosting vigils, and planting trees in memory of victims of police violence. In the town where it all began, thousands filled the park, spilling onto nearby streets. Children sang songs, artists performed spoken word pieces, and activists delivered impassioned speeches. At the center of it all stood the bronze statue of the little girl with the stuffed bunny, surrounded by flowers, notes, and mementos left by visitors. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the crowd, the mother stepped up to speak. Holding back tears, she looked out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. "9 years ago, my life changed forever," she began, her voice steady, despite the emotion choking her throat. "But tonight I see proof that love is stronger than loss, that hope can conquer despair, that together we can build a world where tragedies like this don't happen anymore." As applause broke out, she closed her eyes, imagining her daughter watching from somewhere far away. "I miss you every day," she whispered silently, "but I promise I'll never stop making you proud." The event ended with a symbolic gesture, the release of lanterns into the night sky. Each lantern carried a message written by attendees, words of gratitude, dreams for the future, or promises to keep fighting. As they floated upward, the crowd fell silent, united in reflection. For the mother, standing there surrounded by so much love and determination, it felt like a victory. Not the final one, perhaps, but a meaningful one nonetheless. And as she walked home under a starlit sky, clutching a single white rose, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her little girl was smiling down on her too. By the 10th year, the grieving mother's journey had transformed into something larger than anyone could have anticipated. What had once been a deeply personal mission to honor her daughter's memory had evolved into a global movement that touched millions of lives. Her organization wasn't just an advocate for change anymore. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and collective action. Yet, despite its growth and success, the mother never lost sight of why it all began: to ensure no parent would ever endure the same pain she had. One of the most profound developments during this time was the creation of a national holiday dedicated to victims of police violence and their families. After years of lobbying, lawmakers finally passed legislation establishing the day as an official observance. It was set to coincide with the anniversary of her daughter's passing, a date already etched in the hearts of so many. The decision sent shockwaves through communities across the country, sparking celebrations mixed with tears. For the first time, there was formal recognition of the struggles faced by countless families who had been ignored or silenced for far too long. On the inaugural holiday, cities came alive with tributes. Monuments were unveiled, murals painted, and streets renamed in memory of those lost. In schools, teachers led discussions about empathy, accountability, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Community centers hosted workshops where people shared stories, built connections, and brainstormed ways to continue pushing for reform. Even businesses joined in, donating portions of their profits to organizations working towards systemic change. It was a day unlike any other, a moment when the entire nation paused to reflect on both the progress made and the work still ahead. For the mother, the holiday carried bittersweet emotions. On one hand, it was a testament to everything she had fought for, a tangible reminder that her daughter's life had meaning beyond her tragic death. On the other hand, it reopened wounds that never fully healed. As she stood before a crowd gathered at the park memorial, she couldn't help but think about how different things might have been if her little girl were still here. Would she be excited about the holiday? Would she understand the impact her story had on so many lives? These questions lingered in her mind, unresolved but softened by gratitude. During the ceremony, survivors of similar tragedies took turns sharing their stories. A father spoke about losing his teenage son during a routine traffic stop, his voice breaking as he described the emptiness left behind. A grandmother recounted raising her grandchildren after their mother died in custody, vowing to keep fighting for justice until her last breath. Each testimony added another layer to the tapestry of grief and resilience binding them together. When it was the mother's turn to speak, she stepped forward, clutching a photo of her daughter tightly in her hands. "Today isn't just about remembering," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It's about committing, to ourselves, to each other, and to the future we're building. We've come so far, but we can't stop now. Not when there are still families waiting for answers. Not when there are still children growing up afraid. Not when there's still so much work to be done." The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her daughter's name as tears streamed down faces. The momentum from the holiday spilled over into new initiatives aimed at addressing root causes of police misconduct. One groundbreaking project focused on economic inequality, recognizing that marginalized communities often bore the brunt of systemic failures. Partnering with local businesses and nonprofits, the organization launched job training programs, mentorship opportunities, and financial literacy workshops. The goal was simple: empower people to break cycles of poverty and build stronger, more resilient neighborhoods. Early results were promising, with participants reporting increased confidence and stability in their lives. Another initiative tackled mental health within law enforcement itself. Studies showed that many officers struggling with stress, trauma, or burnout were more likely to resort to excessive force. To address this, the organization worked with psychologists to develop wellness programs specifically tailored for police departments. These included counseling services, peer support networks, and mindfulness training designed to improve emotional regulation and decision-making. While some officers initially resisted, many eventually embraced the resources, admitting they wished such programs had existed earlier in their careers. Despite these strides, resistance remained a constant challenge. Critics argued that reforms were moving too quickly, threatening the fabric of law enforcement. Others dismissed efforts as ineffective, claiming real change required more drastic measures. Online trolls continued to attack, spreading misinformation and hate. But the mother refused to let negativity overshadow progress. During a panel discussion broadcast live nationwide, she addressed detractors directly. "If you think we're doing too much, Then ask yourself why we have to do anything at all. Why is our system failing so many people? That's the question we should all be asking. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring even skeptics to reconsider their views. Slowly but surely, minds began to shift. Police chiefs started reaching out, seeking advice on implementing reforms within their own departments. Politicians introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. Journalists wrote investigative pieces exposing corruption and demanding answers. Every step forward, no matter how small, brought them closer to the world they envisioned. A world where everyone felt safe, respected, and valued. Through it all, the mother found solace in the connections she forged along the way. Survivors became her chosen family, united not by blood but by shared pain and purpose. Together they celebrated milestones, mourned setbacks, and supported one another through the toughest days. They called themselves the Light Keepers, a nod to the idea that even in darkness there was always a flicker of hope worth protecting. Their motto, "We carry the light so others may see," became a rallying cry at events printed on banners and t-shirts, chanted during marches. On the evening of the holiday, as fireworks lit up the sky and music filled the air, the mother stood quietly beside the memorial statue. She traced her fingers over the engraved words, whispering a silent thank you to her daughter. "You started something amazing, sweetheart," she said softly, "and I promise I'll never stop fighting for you." With each passing year, the weight of her loss grew lighter, not because it hurt less, but because she knew her love was making a difference. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by laughter, tears, and the hum of humanity coming together, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her little girl was proud of her too. The years rolled on, and the movement inspired by the grieving mother continued to grow in ways no one could have predicted. What had begun as a personal crusade to honor her daughter's memory transformed into a beacon of hope for millions. It wasn't just about police reform anymore. It was about creating a world where empathy, accountability, and justice were woven into the fabric of everyday life. The mother often reflected on how far they'd come, but she also knew the journey was far from over. For her, every victory was a reminder that love could outlast even the deepest pain. One of the most inspiring developments came when an international coalition reached out, asking to partner with her organization. They wanted to adapt its model to address systemic issues in their own countries, issues like corruption, abuse of power, and lack of trust between citizens and authorities. At first, the idea seemed overwhelming. How could something rooted in such a deeply personal tragedy translate across cultures and continents? But as stories poured in from around the globe, it became clear. Grief and resilience spoke a universal language. In one country, activists used the organization's framework to push for body cameras for law enforcement officers. In another, community leaders organized workshops modeled after the ones she had pioneered, teaching conflict resolution skills to both civilians and police. The ripple effect was undeniable. Families who had once felt powerless began standing up, demanding change, and finding strength in numbers. One woman from overseas sent a heartfelt letter saying, "Your story gave me courage. I thought my voice didn't matter, but now I know it does. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Back home, the impact continued to deepen. Schools incorporated lessons on empathy and civic responsibility into their curriculums, using materials developed by the organization. Teachers reported seeing remarkable changes in students, not just in behavior, but in how they treated one another. A middle school principal shared a story about two boys who had been rivals for years, finally sitting down to talk things out after participating in one of the workshops. They shook hands and promised to look out for each other, he said, his voice filled with pride. That's the kind of change we're talking about. But perhaps the most touching moment came during a visit to a small town where the organization had recently launched a mental health support program. The mother met a young boy named Tommy, whose father had died in a violent encounter with police. Tommy was shy at first, clinging to his grandmother's leg as she introduced him. But when he saw the stuffed bunny she carried, a replica of her daughter's favorite toy. He lit up. "Is that hers?" he asked softly. She nodded, handing it to him. "It's okay if you want to hold on to it for a while," she said with a smile. By the end of their conversation, Tommy was laughing, telling her about his dream of becoming an artist so he could paint happy pictures for people who were sad. These moments reminded her why she kept going, even on days when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. It wasn't just about policies or programs, it was about people, about letting them know they weren't alone, about giving them tools to heal, to fight, to dream of a better future. And though the pain of losing her daughter never fully faded, it became intertwined with purpose. Every step forward, every life touched, every policy changed. It was all part of her daughter's legacy. On the 12th anniversary of her passing, the mother organized what would be her largest event yet. Thousands gathered in the park, spilling onto nearby streets, united by a shared vision of justice and peace. Children played near the statue of the little girl with the stuffed bunny, their laughter filling the air. Artists painted murals, musicians performed songs, and activists delivered impassioned speeches. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the crowd, the mother stepped up to speak. 12 years ago, my world shattered, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion choking her throat. But tonight I see proof that love is stronger than loss, that hope can conquer despair, that together we can build a world where tragedies like this don't happen anymore. As applause broke out, she closed her eyes, imagining her daughter, watching from somewhere far away. "I miss you every day," she whispered silently, "but I promise, I'll never stop making you proud." The event ended with a symbolic gesture, the release of lanterns into the night sky. Each lantern carried a message written by attendees, words of gratitude, dreams for the future, or promises to keep fighting. As they floated upward, the crowd fell silent, united in reflection. For the mother, standing there surrounded by so much love and determination, it felt like a victory. Not the final one, perhaps, but a meaningful one nonetheless. And as she walked home under a starlit sky, clutching a single white rose, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her little girl was smiling down on her too. Years later, historians would look back on this period as a turning point, a time when ordinary people came together to demand extraordinary change. Textbooks would mention the grieving mother and her relentless pursuit of justice. Documentaries would retell her story, ensuring it wouldn't fade with time. But for her, none of that mattered. What mattered was the lives touched, the hearts healed, the future shaped by the work she had done. And so she carried on, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew her daughter was still with her, guiding her steps, lighting her path. In every candlelit vigil, every workshop, every hug shared with a stranger, she found pieces of her child, pieces of hope, pieces of love, pieces of a brighter tomorrow. As she stood before the memorial one last time that evening, she whispered softly, "You showed me what it means to truly live, sweetheart, to fight for what's right, to love without limits, and I'll carry that with me always." Then, taking a deep breath, she turned and walked away, ready to face whatever lay ahead. For the first time in years, she felt not just the weight of loss, but the lightness of hope. And in that moment, she knew her daughter's legacy would endure for generations to come.